But this is one thing an African-centered education does. It gives you an overriding reason, other than merely qualifying for jobs, for being educated. That's why it also gives you a mental frame for memory and remembering. You see, that's why an African-centered education is ultimately the development of intelligence. You see, because it is a motivational system, it gives you a very solid reason for what you're doing. It gives you a frame within which to place information and how that information is to be used. It gives you a means of self-defense. When you look at that nonsense, you can laugh at it and say, I'm not going to be sucked in by this crap. It helps you keep your money in your pocket. It helps increase your savings. And when you increase your savings, you have more to invest in black businesses and economic development. You see? And therefore, learning takes on a whole new meaning and adds a whole new dimension to intelligence and thinking. And most of all, it brings on brand new powers. It permits the ultimate overthrow of those who rule us. So it becomes very, very important for us to look at context, to look at the issues prior to going into an immediate discussion of the issue. Now let's look at male-female relations in terms of marriage for a minute. And I think some people look at it that way, you know, to what degree are black men marrying black women, and to what degree are the marriages staying together. And you hear a lot of things about black males not being committed to marriage, not being responsible, and all of these other things. But you got to be careful, because you have to recognize that the black family structure is not a monolithic structure. What family are you talking about? What is the black family? Are you talking about the single-headed, the single-parent family, the sort of poverty-stricken family with children? But that really does not fully represent the African families whatsoever. In fact, you got a number of African family structures. And you got to be careful then in trying to make that commonly projected black family, that welfare family as they call it or what have you, that they throw up at us all the time, represent what the black family is. You see, because when you, and using that family where you talk about men not being there to take care of children, or men creating children they don't take care of, as the symbol of what a black family is, and as representing the nature of black male and female relations. Du Bois argued that it is not possible to understand black life in America without systematically assessing the influence of historical, cultural, and social, economic, and political forces. The family is a product of society. People get married, have children, and raise families relative to the economic and social system they live in. We don't have time to talk about family history tonight. You need to study family history and see how family structures changed over time, reflecting social, political, and economic change. We often assume that the kind of family we see today in society is the kind of family that always was, or represents what the family should be. We often make an assumption about what the family should be. We have not yet asked ourselves a question as African people, what shape and form should the African family be to solve its problems? We automatically assume that the Eurocentric family that is represented to us represents what a normal family is and what it should be. That creates tremendous problems. And therefore, to the degree to which our families deviate from that structure, to the degree we are to talk about it as broken and dysfunctional and all of these other things. Or that this is the type of family we should go for, instead of saying, given our realities, what is the best family form and shape that will solve our problem? This is the thing I too talk about when I talk about African-centered education, and that is that African-centered education is designed to create the kind of people we need to solve African people's problems. The kind of education that is being received by African people today is designed to solve white folks' problems. You're being educated to solve their problems. That's why no matter how highly educated your people become, the more problems we have. Yes. The more, and you've heard me say it before, the more degrees in business administration we have, the more other people take over our business districts. Which says what? That this degree is not designed for us to take control of our economic system. No, it's not, because the assumption is, both by student, black student, and by teacher, that black students are being prepared to work for white folk, work in white companies, strive to move up in white systems. The education assumes that whites will continue to be in control of the economic system, and therefore they are educated on the assumption that they're going in to get a job from someone else, and they're not educated in how to what? Create jobs for themselves and to create their own economic and political structures. And therefore you get highly educated black economists and so forth who cannot help black people to resolve their economic problems. You cannot name me a top-notch today nationalistic economist, you know, that comes with practical and real workable solutions to the problems we have with aliens taking over our communities. And yet they teach at Harvard and Yale and all these other stupid places. And they get Nobel Prizes for what? Solving other people's problems. And African-centered education is designed to get you to solve your own problem. And the same thing then when we talk about family. How do we define and develop a family that solves our problems? You see? And that's a major part of the issue. Do we really suffer a lack of commitment on the part of black males, let us say? Is there really an absence of values around marriage and stability? Or is it an issue that while black males and females are committed to marriage, they're still committed to the idea of family, they're still committed to the concept of raising African-centered children and so forth, that there are other factors that enter into their personal lives and social lives that block these commitments and destroy these commitments? And it's very important to ask that question, or else you will often falsely accuse each other for problems and issues that are really developed outside of the relationship, that represent themselves in the relationship as anger, as disrespect, as chauvinism, as shirking responsibility, as not committing, you see. Often you're looking at the end product. You see, you're looking at the lack of commitment, if you want to call it that, or the lack of responsibility and so forth, as if it is the beginning of the issue, as if these things themselves do not reflect other things going on in the society. And it becomes important for us to look at that, and it becomes important for each man and black woman to look at that within their own personality, to make sure that they are not misplacing their anger and their accusation from the reality of the world they live in onto each other. and through doing so, supporting a system of oppression. That's why we have to ask the right questions first. Let me quickly read a quotation here from Billingsley, an expert on the black family, whose work I respect a great deal. The stability of the black family system is reflected by the fact that during the years between slavery and the 1960s, a majority of African American families had married couples at their core. And a majority of children were reared by two parents plus other relatives. And we have to keep that in mind too. It's very important to keep a historical thing in mind, because we often get caught up in reading the present back through the past. He makes a list here of families with children. 1960, 78% of black families were two-parent families. Mothers only formed 20% of black families. Father only 2%. 1970, two parents, families 64%, mother only 33%, father only 3%. 1975, 74% two-parent, mother only 44%, and 3% for father only. So it only began somewhere around 1980 that the family, as we talk about it today, the single family begins to flip over in the black community. 1980, 48% were two-parent families, 49% mother family only. 85, the two-parent family dropped to 40%, the mother only 57%, 1990, 37%, as against 60%. There's a historical progression going on here. And we must ask our question, what is happening here? So the idea that black men are not committed or black women are not committed because they are black, or there's something inherently related to their blackness. If you're measuring male-female relations in terms of marriage, then you got to deal with this issue. That certainly has not been the case. We're starting with nearly 80% married here in the 1960s. What then should we ask has happened since that time that these relationships between black men and black women are not consummated in marriage? Can we then be satisfied with what is or is not present in the personality of black males or black females? Not that that isn't the case, and I'm going to get to that in a second too, but should we start at that point in our discussion, or should we begin to ask that question? What's going on in American society that the black family is dwindling the way it is? Building List goes on to say, as late as 1960, when uneducated black men could still hold good-paying jobs, blue-collar jobs, in the industrial sector, fully 78% of black families with children were headed by married couples. That gives us some kind of hint there, doesn't it? Yeah. When I talk about the black male, the black violent adolescent, I get people to understand that you must look at these adolescents within the context of America. You cannot look at them outside of the context. See, this is, again, what European psychology likes to do, as I told you earlier. It likes to make you assume there's nothing wrong with the society, there's nothing wrong with the system, there's something wrong with them. It's something internal to, and it's somehow connected to their Africanness or their blackness that this violence occurs. But we look at this context, and I often talk about it in these terms. First of all, you must recognize that black-on-black violence flows from white-on-black violence. That is the root of black-on-black violence. The historical hundreds of years and unrelenting violence of whites against black folk. And black folks' reactionary response to that violence. That continues to this very moment and continues in so many different forms until it's hard to count. the obvious form of slavery, but that wasn't the end of it. Reconstruction still was a violent period. Jim Crowism, racial and job discrimination, insult to black and African histories, insult to our characters, the whole bit. Police brutality, legal lynchings in the court, questioning of our intelligence, questioning our natural beauty. All of this is one assault, what? After another. One assault, unrelenting, unforgiving against black people. And these people representing a tremendous power. And some of us have reached the point that we see them as invincible. Yet we are frustrated and angered and shamed and all of these other things by this relentless attack against us. And we then often get and try to deal with these psychological emotions through self-destructive behavior or the destruction of one another, because we have not yet made up our minds that we are going to destroy the people who have perpetrated this thing against us. Yes. And I'm saying then that white on black violence creates a mentality in all black people. Not a single black person escapes from this violence against black people. I don't care what class you belong to. Nobody escapes it. So there's a pervasive consciousness that goes across the total black community, across all classes, that is a result of this constant violence of whites against blacks. Then you look within that context, and you look at the black adolescent having to try to develop into manhood and womanhood in that kind of background. This is why standard psychology won't do. You can't take that white psychology and leave it as it is and deal with this. This is not a white child's problem. This is not the context in which the white adolescent has to struggle into manhood. Look at the issues then that the adolescent has to go through. And you can say all adolescents have to go through these problems. However, the black adolescent in the context of being a part of an oppressed people, even though his problem may be the same, but it's in a what? Different context, and that context represents itself in the problem, and it creates different outcomes. So you can't say, oh, children are the same and they wrestle with the same problems. That's not it. That's only a part of it. But they don't wrestle with it within the what? Same context. You see? The white child is not representing the adolescent, dealing with the adolescent crises in the context of oppression and subordination and unrelentless violence against their people. But you see, that's what that Eurocentric psychology will do to you. So it calls itself adolescent psychology, right? And leaves it at that. And you think you got a neutral course. The adolescent has to struggle with issues of identity. Of course. But the black adolescent struggling with the issues of identity is quite different from the white adolescent struggling with issues of identity. It's quite different from the white adolescent struggling with issues of identity. Ethnic identity. How does he deal with the fact that his ethnic group is in the position that it is in, has been scandalized, has been subordinated? So it's his issue, and often he doesn't make up his mind as to whether he is even a part of the group. Often he's a Michael Jackson. If he's not physically bleached, psychologically bleached. Or somewhere, what? In between, never quite achieving full identity. While another major issue of adolescence is what? Gender identity. Masculinity and femininity. How does a black man define what it means to be a man when he's oppressed by another man? When he's told he should play the full role of another man, and to be a man is to do this and this and this and this. And yet there's a system that makes sure that that role is not fully acted out. And then he's cursed out by both his woman and the other people for not fulfilling his role. Huh? And there are other issues. The issues of peer acceptance, the issues of status symbols, the issues of body image, the issues of sexuality. All of them are adolescent issues, but they're issues when you deal with the black adolescent take on a very special meaning. That's why you have to have a psychology of the black adolescent, not adolescent psychology, but one that deals with young children. How do you educate these children if you don't have a psychology of the black child and you don't have a psychology of the adolescent? And now you wonder why they drop out of school and all the other things. You haven't prepared yourself to teach them correctly because you have not studied them at all. You don't know them at all. So what do we say? The adolescent is within a context of a black community that's still dealing with the psychological consequences of an assault upon itself as a people. The black adolescent now has to deal with adolescent issues within that context. And then let's look at it on top of that. Let's look at another issue. The black adolescent dealing with those issues within the context of his class or socioeconomic status. Yeah. What class you belong to, what income you have, what educational background there is also influences the way you're going to deal with problems. Let's then look, let us say, at the so-called inner city black adolescent. What kind of world does that adolescent exist in? We can't go through the whole thing, but you're looking at, for the first time, now note what we said about the statistics. 1960s, nearly 80% of the black family is what, mother, father headed, if you want to look at that. 64, you still got the majority. 75, you still got the majority, and so forth. However, those born since the 70s, since the mid-70s, for the first time in I don't know how many years, are now born into a family structure into which I and the vast majority of us who are older were not born into. And are not born into as what? White kids, understand? And yet the issues of adolescence have got to be worked out in there. Unemployment, high levels of unemployment exist there. Deindustrialization, meaning industries have literally been moved out of this country. And what did Billingsley say? When uneducated black men could still hold good-paying blue-collar jobs. In other words, you see, when these other people complain about how they made it as immigrants, this was the point at which this country had its industrial base that could pick up 8th grade educated people, could pick up dropouts. People could work in the automobile factories making good money, not having graduated from high school or going to college. They could make even better money than college graduates at that point. There were these working on the docks or working here and there. Where are those jobs today? You see, and therefore the young man that drops out today is not caught in that safety net that you had before. What generation of you were raised with crack as a major trade item in your community, or in a community flooded with guns and all the other kind of things? In other words, you got to stop and think. The current black adolescent is facing problems and trying to solve the issues of adolescence in a very different world than the world was even 20 or 30 years ago. And unless you take that into consideration, you're not going to resolve the issues related to our adolescent people and our children. And that means then again, ladies and gentlemen, in terms of marriage and black male-female relations, these relationships have to also be looked at in terms of what kind of world has occurred since the 60s that's now impacting on the nature of the black family. But let's look at it from another point of view when you talk about relations. And I'm trying to get at this idea that you can't glibly run off at the mouth about the nature of black male-female relations. And I hate to complicate it for you, but it's what we got to do, you see. Because when you look across classes in the black community, you see a very different thing in terms of marriage. Again, quoting Bill Lindsley, an overwhelming majority of 83% of the black middle class sector were husband and wife families. We're talking about Bill Lindsley's piece here in State of Black America 1990. So if you want to read that piece, put out by Urban League, you can. So the article is a current one. What is in the black middle class families, 83%. Thus, among the black upper class, an overwhelming 96% are husband-wife families. Only among the two poor sections did single-parent families constitute the majority. So are we having here a fundamental problem with black male-female relations that has nothing to do with income and other things? Or are we having these relations being influenced by the nature of what's going on in the system itself? Let's read his list again. Upper class, married couples, 96%. Black people making over $50,000 or more a year. Apparently they're relating well enough to what? Stay together. Doesn't say they don't have some problems. Some marriages have problems at some point. But if I'm saying that, if we're measuring the nature of black male-female relations in terms of what? Marriage, then we have to look at this thing and we got to explain these class differentials. Because apparently then there must not be some great conflict that's inherent in the nature of the relationship between black men and black women, or else we would have what? We wouldn't have these what? Class differentials going on here. I'm not being too professorial here, am I? Okay, I hope not. I'm taking the risk here. But I want to talk to you today. I don't want to, I want to talk to you. Hang in. I know it's tough sometimes, but just stick with me for a moment, because I think if we are sincere about this problem, then we got to think today. The black middle class, 83% married couples, 17% unmarried. Working class, non-poor working class, 60% as against 40%. Working poor, 33% with 6 to 7% single parent. Underclass, that is non-working poor, 25% married couples, and 75% single. So there's apparently what going on? There's some kind of economic factor operating in this situation, where maybe poor young men and unstable young men and so forth don't make commitments too fast or can't maintain responsibility too swiftly or too steadily if their employment is either not there or it is unstable. Is it possible that instead of confronting these issues realistically, it represents itself in some other aberrated psychological form? And we are just looking at the superficial form of the young male's reaction instead of its basic foundations. And therefore and therefore we end up blaming the victim instead of getting involved in the social transformation and the revolutionary transformation of the economic relations between blacks and whites in this country, and a restructuring of the economic system of this country as a way of restructuring the relationships between black men and black women. But you see, that's asking a lot, isn't it? It's so easy to blame each other and accuse rather than get on with the business of revolution, which we started but we cooled off on, and recognize that a family is an economic unit. It's not just a social emotional unit, it is an economic unit. And one of the major problems that destroys relationships between couples is the problem of money. Yeah, you got to face the reality, man. That sweet love that you had can hit the rocks of a hard budget so hard. I know why you caught up in your, all that dazed state you were in when you recorded. And you think that thing is going to carry you through. You've got another thought coming. When you have children, which is also another issue in marriages, how to raise children, how to deal with children, is also one of the major areas of conflict in marriage. Philosophies of child rearing and so forth. Sex, of course, is another. Yeah. Yeah. And nothing can make a man impotent like not having a job. Yes. Yes. Ladies and gentlemen, masculinity is very much tied up with work. Yeah. And productivity. It's very difficult for a man who's out of work and who's unemployed and who has no money not to begin to question his manhood. People begin to personalize their unemployment. You may say it's because of a recession and this and that, but you still say, what? Why me? What's wrong with me? Well, I can understand the other people not be, why me? I was reading here the other day, I didn't get it to bring it in here today, of a Harvard-educated white man and his loss of jobs, and how he was talking about after sending out so many resumes, he just gave up. Yeah. We're not talking about black men on the street. And in fact, the whole piece was about educated guys, good guys who went through the schools, obeyed all the rules, sent out 30 and 40 resumes for which they got no answer. Now they don't even tell you thank you. They don't even say, we received your resume, because that costs them stamps. You just drop it into the hole now. And here, after sending out the things, he just became a part of what that government calls people who've just, given up. Now, you're not going to see him hanging on the corner because he's living somewhere else, but the psychology of it is the same. It has nothing to do with blackness. It has to do with the fact that if you've gone out there and tried time and time and time again without success, it's very difficult to keep on being insulted. And some people back off. It's also built, you also have to look at the fact that this society especially does not like the American black male. I'm telling you. Recently, a study was executed, which demonstrated that even when many black males indicated that they would work for the same or less pay than immigrant males, they still were not hired. Yeah. And they could speak the language, knew the customs, and the whole thing, they still were not hired. I'm telling you. Because the white man is ultimately afraid of the African American male, I'm telling you. And that has to be taken into consideration. I read a study some years ago that indicated that in one program where the government even agreed to pay the salaries of these black youngsters, many of the companies still would not hire them. This is a part of the reality, an African-centered education must confront. Yeah. And this is what has happened. Again, before you jump too swiftly into accusing people of the absence of responsibility and commitment, know the reality and the context in which they operate. Let's look at this issue, though, of commitment for a minute. And this might sort of upset you a bit, but I want you to look at it because we need to be upset to sort of break old habits. And again, I'm reading again from Billingsley's Understanding African American Family Diversity, which I think is a very good piece, by the way, because he does look at black families in many different forms and makes us realize that the black family is still a very viable institution. But he says, and you can find him over this, the abandonment of the marriage relation is severe among both black males and females. The decline has been greater, however, among females. Thus, among adult black males, 18 and over, the proportion married declined dramatically from an overwhelming 67% in 1970 to a bare majority of 51% by 1985. However, the proportion of black women who were married plunged from a similar majority of 63% in 1970 to a minority of 43% by 1985. These trends do not support the commonly held view that black men have a weaker attachment or commitment to marriage than black women. Indeed, it may suggest just the opposite. The fact that the proportion married is higher, referring here to men, and the proportion divorced is lower, and the proportion remarried is also high among men, may suggest that black men have a greater attachment to and dependence on marriage than black women. In any event, however, the major observation here is that both black men and women have been avoiding or abandoning the marital status in record numbers during the recent years. So again, it complicates the matter, but it also, I think, should have us stop and pause before we begin to accuse each other so quickly of lack of commitments and these other kind of things that causes such dissension among us as men and women. Quoting here from Marian Wright Edelman's work, Black Children in America, from the State of Black America, 1989, and she quotes William Julius Wilson in studying the black family, the link between black male joblessness and declining black marriages. Both the black delay in marriage and the lower rate of remarriage, I'm quoting Wilson here, each of which is associated with high percentages of out-of-wedlock birth and female-headed households, can be directly tied to the labor market status of black males. Our data show that black women, especially young black women, are facing a shrinking pool of marriageable, that is, economically stable men. The problem of black joblessness should once again be placed as a top priority item in public policy agendas designed to enhance the family status. She goes on to talk about the number of men and women between 20 and 24 who are married and so forth, but in the interest of time, I'll skip over that. She makes a conclusion here that I think is important. The crux of the problem facing the black family today is that young black women who become pregnant are far less likely to marry than they used to be, nor are they likely to marry as young pregnant white women are. The whole of the increase in the proportion of black children in female-headed families over the last decade is accounted for by the increase of those who live with unmarried mothers, and not by the increase in the proportion who live with divorced or separated mothers. She is speaking here then around the issue that to a good extent the single-headed family, the family headed by mothers and so forth, is directly related to the decline of the employment of young black males. How easy it is to take on responsibility when you got a good job, to commit yourself when you got a decent job and a good future. Yet a shortage of marriageable black men continues to exist since they are forced to run a gauntlet of school expulsions, special education placements, dropouts, foster care placements, delinquency, arrests, incarceration, unemployment, drug addiction, alcohol abuse, homelessness, homicides, suicides from the cradle to the grave. This is why often you see the solution to a problem sometimes doesn't lie directly in terms of the problem you're discussing, in the sense that While we concentrate on the nature of the relationship between black men and black women in its psychological aspects, we must recognize that to a good degree, the solution of the problem may also lie in other areas. The appropriate education of black young men and women. This is again why we talk about an African-centered education. The education of young males, which people misunderstand so much. You're educating them into chauvinism. You're separating them from the women. Well, where are they now? Huh? What kind of education are they receiving at this moment? We are telling you that we want to educate them away from drugs, right? Away from homicide and violence against each other. We want to educate them to respect women. We want to educate them to undertake the role of African male adults in the society. We want to educate them so that they can stay in school and graduate and develop and be productive so that they can come back to black women. And what do we hear? Accusations that we're trying to separate them. Well, what are we talking about if they're not already what? Separated. Why are we even here today? So we got to change it. Stop and think. But you let these white feminists and these other people grab a hold of your head. You let people who don't understand African culture and history and so forth, you let people who don't understand that there is something called a male psychology. Men and women are not the same. I'm telling you. Yeah, because we got a lot of unisexists around here. Yeah. I mean, I was discussing with some young people here the other night. He wanted to be just like her, and she wanted to be just like him. No, why don't you just get a homosexual marriage? The joy of, I mean, there must be some differences in there somewhere. The joy of a woman is that a man is, to some significant degree, what? A man. And he is what? To some degree, what? Different. And vice versa. You know, the difference there means something. You know, how do you get into this situation where each of you got to be an exact duplicate of each other? No, you're confusing equality with sameness. You think in order for people to be the same, to be equal, they have to what? Be the same. No. You got to rework this kind of thing. Men and women's brains are not exact duplicates of each other. No, they're not. Now, see, this frightens some people because as soon as they hear difference, they think inferiority. Yeah, and black people have that problem. You know, as soon as you say we're different from white folk in some sort of way, people get uptight. Even though white talk about that difference to promote their what? Superiority. You see? And so we work hard to make sure there are no differences between us. And it is that very struggle to ignore fundamental and important differences that maintain the differences, that maintains the system itself. The inability to face your anxiety about being different and using that difference to advance your positive interest that maintains the problem. This pretense and this Pollyanna approach that pretends there are no fundamental differences and so forth doesn't solve problems and issues. And yet we have this kind of problem here. We are trying to salvage our black males, not to make them dominant. How can they be dominant? What is black chauvinism, male chauvinism anyway? I've often told the black feminists, you misread white feminists anyhow. The white feminists are fighting against the white man. The white man is on top of us all. How is the black man controlling your jobs and controlling, all of this kind of business? Who are you fighting and for what reason? or you're fighting, you see. And these issues have to be dealt with. But we'll move it forward from this point. And these issues have to be resolved as a part of the black male-female relations. So then the delay in marriage and remarriage rates and so forth are very much related. The psychology of the relationship between black males and females then has to be looked at within context. We have to look at the reality of the kind of education both black males and black females deal with. We're going to look quickly at a problem that's common, and that is, of course, the problem of alienation. And alienation and how it feeds into our relationships as black men and women. When we talk about the social context in which people live, yet that's what is a social context? Does it stand outside of people? What do we mean when we talk about a social context? Social mores, social values, social attitudes and orientations. Well, social attitudes and orientations do not stand outside as something separate from people, but they are actually a part of us. So when we talk about social attitudes, that means people walk around with those attitudes, in their very bodies and minds. We have to keep that in mind. When we talk about social attitude, it means that a large percentage or a majority of people within a social group pretty much think along the same lines. They pretty much accept the same moral standards. They pretty much accept the ways of expressing themselves through symbols. You see, symbol of love, buying diamond rings, flowers, and this and that. In other words, there are sort of agreed on ways in the social system of how you express love, how you express feelings, things of this nature. We operate on assumptions about what is right behavior and wrong behavior in our relationship one to the other, what one should or should not do. And we really, as an African people, given the fact that we live in a very different social situation, have not really stopped to examine whether we should accept a lot of these moral rules and approaches that we do. They have not been brought up for examination. We are operating often on ways of expressing love. If you love me, you'll do this. If you love me, you'll make this. And what do you mean by that? Are you in a position, given your political, economic situation in the world, that you can express your love through this symbolic means that you have gotten from another group with a different history and in a different economic situation? Or are you going to say, that's what a man's supposed to do? A man, regardless of the reality of his economic, social, or political situation? Or men, that's what a woman is supposed to do. What kind of woman? Under what kind of circumstances? Are we then operating on a different kind of woman? Under what kind of circumstances? Are we then operating on a set of rules, expectations, and perceptions that in no way reflect the realities that we're in as people, and therefore imposing these artificial expectations on each other and fighting and hurting each other and destroying our children and ultimately destroying our people as a result thereof? We got to ask that. And when you ask that and answer that, it's got to enter into the education of your children. It's got to enter into the redefinition of the relationship between black males and black females. We are cursing each other out over somebody else's rules and mores and attitudes and so forth. Often you see a culture lays these expectations down on us without qualification. And they says, well, if you're in this position, maybe you need to modify this in this sort of way. No, this is what a man is supposed to be. This is what a woman is supposed to do. No matter what happens. And when they don't meet up to it, you got a right to call names, to walk out, to destroy children, and do all the other kind of things we do to each other. You see? In other words, in society represents itself in people. And this society represents itself in us. Quickly, I'll run through here in terms of alienation, because this is a major problem, and the roots of, even in the general society, the roots of many, if not most, personal problems of maladaptiveness and maladjustment, interpersonal problems and so forth, flow from alienation. And again, as I said, when you look, though, at our folk, alienation takes on an even deeper meaning and a more tragic meaning. Alienation is the first necessary, is the first step necessary for the efficient domination I'm talking here. That is where you don't have to hold guns on people and things, where they voluntarily do what the society needs for them to do to keep themselves under subordination and in oppression. To achieve that, you got to alienate a people. So the first step there is alienation. To the alienation of the personality by outside agencies. You couldn't give, as I've told you before, all of your money to other alien groups if you're not alienated. You could not give 95 cents out of every dollar to other ethnic groups if you were not outside yourself. You could not subsidize the economic, social, psychological, educational well-being of Korean children while you starve your own if you were not out of your mind. If you didn't have at some level, self-hatred and self-negation, and on some level, though you love your children, there's still another element of negativity under there to continue to rob them of their economic inheritance and to rob them of your wealth, to buy what you want and beg for what you need and leave them begging and starving in the streets while you feed the other people's children. You got to be out of your mind. You got to be alienated. That alienation began in slavery. To alienate a people means to alienate their wealth, to put them in a position where their wealth cannot be used in their own interest, to put them in a position where the product of their labor goes to other people. What did I say about MC Hammer? Using your own cultural product to enrich what? Other folk. Black music selling 60% of the music in the world, outselling people's national music. You understand? In their own countries, they're buying more black music than they buy their own native music. Billions of dollars. And yet black people only get a fraction of that wealth. And then they even use that music, as I said earlier. And you see your kids out here bobbing and weaving on the train, being made dumb, listening to rhythm and being made stupid, using your own cultural product to make you buy cassettes and all the other kind of things to rob you. You got to be alienated in order for that to happen. You got to be alienated for people to insult you, don't want to live with you, don't want your children in the school with them, to have a Florio and these other people going to jerk your quality education money away from you soon. Oh yeah, getting ready to jerk it back. Yeah, they're working on you. They hid it behind higher taxes. It was hidden behind one thing: we are not going to invest in those Negroes. That's what it's about. And forgetting that black folk pay taxes and pay a higher percentage of their income in taxes than other folk. You see? But what does it mean then? That's what alienation means, to be separated from yourself and have your own product used against you to maintain yourself. To have people then who insult you, don't want to live with you, don't want to have you around, don't want to educate your children, and then you go in and buy a $500, a $1,000 suit from those same people, and you feel good about it. You got to be crazy. Yes. That's why a psychology of African Americans and a psychology of oppression begins with the fact that the craziness of black people is an economic necessity. Yeah. See, the more you go into these issues, and that means people who aren't able to get along with each other too, you see? And you begin to get an idea then of what an African-centered education is once you start looking at these problems, don't you? Huh? You're not going to get that in any white folks' school and learn how to deal with this issue of giving your money away to other people in white folks' school. It's designed. One of the major reasons black people are educated is to increase their consumption. Yes. The major point of education is to get black people to consume. You're going to be a lawyer so you can make money to what? To buy things from. You're going to get that extra master's degree at night to make money to do what? Buy from. You're going to be a doctor so you can what? Buy from. You see, so I'll just get into consumption, pure consumption. What did I tell you? One of the reasons why the black male is destroying too many of our black males are destroying people is because they measure their manhood by what? Consumption, not production. Consumption. This is what an African-centered education must deal with. Not this multicultural dancing together and singing each other's songs. Your culture is equal to mine. We all contributed to the great American dream. You're full of it. How in the hell is white culture equal to yours and it's killing you? Huh? How do we celebrate this and pretend that that culture has not been a dangerous, evil culture? Huh? No, but that's what they're going to have us doing, in each other, in multiculturalism. Self-alienation refers to a separation from or a lack of awareness of an inhibiting fear of actualizing and developing one's positive intellectual, emotional, and behavioral and spiritual potentials and capacities. What did I say? This black child starts with a natural head start, intellectually, behaviorally, and otherwise. You have to alienate this child from itself. And to be alienated from itself means that it cannot use these natural gifts for its own interest. That's right. It cannot use this ability it has in language and thinking and so forth for itself. It's either got to escape those natural gifts and leave them behind, or it's got to constrict them and distort them in a way that they can only be used to maintain European power. And this is what alienation is about. It's either going to leave you basically powerless or without, or it's going to organize what power they decide to leave in such a way that it still is going to contribute to maintaining the system. In fact, you're going to see that as the ultimate endpoint of your education, the degree to which you can contribute to America. In fact, you teach your multicultural history that way. In fact, you teach your multicultural history that way. Let's talk about how we contributed to the United States. What are you talking about? Contribute to what? The Star Wars defense? Huh? Contribute to helping America maintain oppression of African people? Let's not be so swift to congratulate ourselves even on that. Contribute to the killing of Indians so that this country could these people could run themselves over? I don't want to rain on your parade. We got to think here. But that kind of teaching separates you from what? Reality. And to the degree that you're separated from reality, to that degree, you're out of your mind. So then, to alienate people, you must separate them from their God-given gift. Self-alienation involves being separated from one's real self. This is the real African child, intellectually advanced, powerful mind, body, and soul. This is that real child, not a child who can't read, has problem writing, has problems doing mathematics. We talk about ourselves as inventing mathematics and technology and so forth, and then we have to ask ourselves the question, why then are we having problems in the areas of science and technology and so forth today? It implies then that somewhere we have become separated from the original African technological and scientific mind. Yeah. And this is what alienation is about, is being separated from the real self. The integrated, the powerful, the realized capacities, the constructive relating one to the other. It means becoming separated from our bodies as people too. Yes, we see it in the Michael Jackson situation and many other situations here. And white folk just talked this week about the great discovery now of this injection that they can have to turn them brown. Yeah, they've been researching on this for years, melanin injections and other forms of injection. Now they're trying to get brown and we're trying to get white. Because they realize the value of this brown skin, this black skin. They are tearing up the ozone level, and now they're trying to get themselves in the position to protect themselves against those rays, and it is this black skin that does the best job of it, you know. Yeah. And it goes deeper than that, of course. You've been to the conferences on melanin. I don't have to talk to you about that. And then we got somebody talking about black and white and their face turning into all other kind of ethnic groups, and then they're turning colors. What kind of thing is this? Madness. You can't really multiculturally relate to other people until you learn to relate to yourself first. There's no way around that. And yet again, we're turning the doggone thing backwards. We're going to love and relate and get to know everybody else and everything. But we've been doing that all the time. When are we going to get around to us? All the time. Now they had you learn about white folk, and now they're going to throw a few other ethnic groups into the hopper for you to learn. Talk about learning problems. You're really going to have one now. You're going to know about everybody else but whom? But yourself. And that's going to be your road to salvation. You got to be out of your mind. You got to know self what first. Yes. Then you can integrate with other people. You can relate to other people. You can be comfortable among them. You can actually enjoy being with them, frankly. Yes, definitely. Because I was telling a white girl here the other night, you know, African-centered education teaches you how to get along with white folk. Yes. That's right. Yes. The way the Japanese get along with them to get what? Where they want to go. They're not going to wear the hostility and everything on their sleeves that just create all kinds of problems when they need to get in and get information and knowledge and, you know, do diplomacy and do the other kind of things. You're going to learn how to get along with other people and be at ease with other people and put other people at ease while you steal their money and wealth and power right from them. But if you're afraid, you don't know yourself and all this other thing, you think that white's going to rub off on you, you know, then you can't work in the interests of black people, operating from the standpoint of overt hostility and anger and stuff like that, being out of control of yourself. You can proclaim your love for black people with all of that anger and stuff, but often you end up being a destructive force. And I've found, ladies and gentlemen, these are the people also who are so angry and so ready to go to war that you can't get to really cooperate with you to accomplish anything. Yeah. When you need to sit down and think and organize and for people to make commitments and to give money and to give time and effort, they are so perfectly African and so perfectly, you know, rigid about moving in the world. Any little tiny mistake or any little tiny thing that they see as a deviation from, you know, they're out. They're contributing little or nothing to the movement. And they use their great Africanicity as an excuse for not cooperating and working with the group. That means anger and other stuff has not been appropriately integrated in the personality. It is not enough for you just to wear these clothes. You got to change your mind. You got to change your psychology inside. Be careful. In psychology, we have something we call the reaction formation, where the person projects a strong image outside against what they really are, what? Inside. Sort of diverts people's attention from who and what they really are, and divert their own attention from what they really are. Yeah. Okay, I'll quickly go ahead. Develops. Self-alienation springs from having the real self degraded, disparaged, impaired. We were talking about learning disabilities in my class. That's the number one thing you have to learn, that black people learn to be dumb. Yes. Yes. That we learn to be disabled learners. We're not, there is no evidence at all worth a dime that says learning disabilities are related to brain damage. You won't find it. Most people think so. Yeah. People assume it. No, not at all. But people think so. It makes a good excuse, you see. What happens then? We'll have to do that another time. Associated with inferiority. In other words, what I'm saying, for people to be alienated, they want, and to escape the real self, you have to associate that real self with things, with certain kind of things. Again, we back to the association psychology of Pavlov, aren't we? Good old basic principles. One of the landmarks of power is the capacity to associate things that were not at first associated, and getting people to learn those associations and reacting in terms of those associations. When you get the dog to respond to the bell with salivation, it's because you have the power to do so. And you have the power over the food, and the power over the bell, and the power of what? Attaching them together, even though in nature they have no natural relationship whatsoever. And so when the European then, this is why you have to take from him the power of definition, the power of language. You got to rob that from him. You got to take it from him. The very essence of hypnosis is to associate things that if you thought about it had no relationship whatsoever one with the other. But the person doesn't think about it and doesn't look at it. And so what does the European do to hypnotize the black man, to get the black man to run away from his natural African gifts that we talked about earlier, to first of all hide those gifts from him, to say that what? They don't exist at all, to have you study the psychology of everybody else's children but your own, you say you're not come to understand yourself. They then associate that real beautiful African self with degradation. They disparage it, they impair it, associate it with inferiority, make you suffer if you identify with it, therefore punishment. You have fear, and because you fear injury or annihilation, you want to get away from it. The African image is vulgarized and associated with unattractiveness and other negative behavioral characteristics, and therefore it pushes us to separate ourselves from it. What kind of male and female relationships can you have with this kind of mind? And think about how this self-alienation transforms itself and reflects itself as you move up and down income levels and you move across neighborhoods and social systems. And you begin to get some idea of what is going on. That anger and that frustration that comes from alienation, and yet does not permit us to attack the real sources of our problem, which means then that anger and the frustration must be displaced onto ourselves or onto others like ourselves. In what way can we understand alienation and get around it and teach our children and love our children in a way that this no longer becomes a part of their psychology, so that we can relate one to another, black men and black women and black men to black men and black women to black women, that advances the interests of our people. This is what it's about. This is, again, why I'm telling you an African-centered education is very different from a multicultural education. You see the issue here? This is an issue of African-centered education. Thus, person who is alienated is one who is not permitted to be himself. He becomes frightened of self-discovery. You don't even want to read African history. You got some people who don't even want to read it. They get frightened of it. If they're not frightened of it because they don't think it's, are they afraid of the anger they're going to experience if they read about slavery? Stuff like that. But it's ultimately to engage in self-transformation and exorcising the demons and the poisons that have been introjected into our personalities as a result of being separated from this. But self-knowledge does not come easy. If it came easy, everybody would be into it. Yeah. Yeah. It means facing anxieties and facing these other things. But self-discovery, and therefore the alienated person is frightened of self-discovery, and therefore cannot attain self-fulfillment. Can't do it. And as a result, is filled with gaps and voids and empty spaces and insatiable cravings. The alienated person cannot be for himself. You're alienated to live for what? Aliens. That's number one. The alienation is to serve the wishes of aliens, people outside of the personality. The individual measures himself. So therefore, the alienated person cannot be for himself. That's why you can't spend money for your children in the interest of your children and invest in business in the interest of your children. You can't do it when you're alienated, even though you got money of it in your pocket. You think there's something wrong with discriminating in terms of how you spend your money. I don't see color. You even want to flatter these Koreans and how much you can spend. Yeah, they learn to smile at you now because they know Negroes love to be smiled at. They'll spend much more money then. You read this case of I think the judge put this woman on 5 years probation in California, shooting this black girl in the back of the head. Yes. The black girl is walking up to pay her for an item. She accuses her apparently of stealing. Then she jumps back and the black girl gives her a few blows around the head. Shows her where it's at. Then the girl just comes and puts the item on the counter and says, forget it, turns around to walk out. The woman shoots her in the back of the head. Yeah, all on video, the whole thing, and the judge gives her 5 years probation. But I think what was worse than that was some Negroes over there who were going to train the Koreans in public relations toward black folk. How to smile, because they say, well, we don't naturally smile as people. Well, black folk need to be smiled at. They give you more money when you smile at them. What goes on there? You got to be alienated to reach that kind of solution. But when you're alienated, you can't live for yourself. So therefore, the alienated person must be for and live for something or someone other than himself. He lives outside himself, besides himself. He is externalized. He is not centered. He is off. He lives in terror of self-discovery. Thus, he must seek reassurance chronically, which is a part of the problem. Support my image of manhood. Support my image of womanhood. You're not treating me like a woman. I'm a woman. You're not treating me like a man. Constant need. Always what? Testing. Always needing. Every occasion is a test of to what degree are you confirming my manhood, or to what degree are you confirming my womanhood. And people get caught up in all these little nasty tests one with each other. Endless. Because there's a need for chronic reassurance. He must find solace in persons and things outside himself. Happiness, self-satisfaction must be gained from outside sources. When we get that great integration in the sky with white folk, then we'll be happy and we'll love one another. He must be built around others. His world must be built around others. We ain't happy till we live with them. Can't be happy in our own neighborhood, among ourselves. Yeah, that's alienation. Happiness will only occur when we have integrated neighborhoods. You out of your minds. Happiness will only occur when little white boys and little white girls like little black boys and little black girls. Until that time happens, we're going to be self-hating. We're going to want white dolls. You're out your mind. If you need somebody else's love to love yourself, what happens if they never love you? You're in tough time. He therefore becomes their captive and addicted to these things. When you live outside yourself, you become addicted to those things. You got black people addicted to integration. Yes, the NAACP. Haven't developed an economic plan yet because they believe the love of white folk will solve everything. He therefore loses self-control. You can't have self-control and be under alien control at the same time. Self-determination, self-knowledge, self-confidence, self-acceptance, self-esteem, self-love, and on we go. He loses his freedom, his ability to really exercise choices. He thinks he's choosing, but he's been manipulated into choice. No, doesn't make choice. You got to think and bring a critical mind and intellect for choice to occur. But if you're manipulated by Coke and MC Hammer, if you're manipulated by tennis shoes on Michael Jordan and this other kind of stuff, you're not making a real choice. The choice has been made for you. He loses control of his environment. He loses his capacity, ultimately, to love. Yes. He has a world filled with confusion and suspicion, and we got to bring it all to a close. There's so many other things here. But the thing I'm trying to point out here then, that a major problem we have to solve is the problem of alienation. We must look at how that problem operates within all of our relationships, male and female relationships, how it represents itself on different class levels. I'm not saying necessarily that this black middle class, because there may be more two-headed families there, upper class, is less alienated than the lower ones now. But you know, I've seen two good alienated people, because they got a good salary to support their alienated life, do pretty good. So, that's why again I say you gotta look at what you mean by male-female relations, you see. And if they've deceived themselves that their status and so forth means that they've achieved a certain level of masculinity and femininity and social acceptance and all the other kind of stuff, and they've learned very, routine ways of relating to each other and things of this nature, or they have available to them good marriage counselors and, other kind of supporting institutions. At least they don't have to worry about the money problem too heavily, so that doesn't intrude too heavily into their lives. They don't have too many children, one or two, so that's not too much to cope with. A pretty good house and so forth. Then when you get in that situation, you see, they can still be very alienated, but still the existence of these things can modify that alienation and even support it and make it seem the epitome of health, you see. But we still must look at it, because this class of people still is not working in the interests of black people. They are being sucked up in their alienation and their illusion of health to maintain the illness of the black community, and maintain disease in the black community, and to become a disease themselves in the essence of the black community, you see. But it is something, though, that is a part and parcel of all of us, and it is something that we must remove from ourselves as African people as part and parcel of the process of improving the relations between black males and females, and removing our relationship and removing the negatives in the relationship period. To a good extent, a lot of the problems that adhere between us, flowing from alienation, represent themselves in various ways. A quick category would be what we call narcissism, because often the alienated person feels worthless at bottom, feels rejected, and often inferior. But often again in what we call the reaction formation, they go the very opposite. They project a huge pride and ego. What do we say? You see, When we want to escape a problem, we become obsessed with another issue, don't we? Yes. What am I saying in black on black violence? I'm saying white Americans have a criminal history. They have a criminal nation. The nation is built on criminality and murder and exploitation. It is a part of their collective psyche. The United States is a mafia government. No one has done more damage and degradation and murder, rape, and robbery than Europeans. Yes. Therefore, in order to escape confrontation with their true criminal nature, they must accuse others of being criminals. What we call projection. They must become obsessed with the criminality of other people. And black folk become those other people, you see. What does Clinton Cox say? You called the Indians savages so you could behave toward them what? Savagely. That's the function of stereotyping, you see. If I call you a criminal, then I can treat you what? Criminally. I don't owe you justice. In fact, shooting you in the street is justice. We know you are already a criminal. Why should we bother to take you to trial? Yes, that's what it is. We're doing a service. We're saving the taxpayers' money. What have we lost? A criminal? What are you complaining about? Yeah, this is the deal. What does it mean then? When you can become, then often people, in order to escape certain problems, become obsessed with other issues to the point where they don't have time or the energy or anything else to think about anything else. They don't see anything else. So I can forget my self-hatred. I can forget my self-alienation if I concentrate on how much I love myself. But this is a bad kind of love, you see. It's not the right kind of love. If I concentrate on what? How great I am. If I concentrate on making other people see what? How great I am. You see? And therefore, my 24 hours a day, I'm obsessed by projecting my what? Greatness. And I will, but that greatness is coming out of what? Hatred and inferiority. And since I'm greater than everyone else, I must make everyone else superior. In what? Inferior to me. In fact, I can only love people who attest to my superiority. I can only love a woman who 24 hours a day maintains my superior ego and states that she is in need of leadership and guidance. And I'm her leader. I may be emasculated in the world, but in my house, I'm the king. And at any moment she indicates that I have feet of clay, I shall use them to stomp her. Yeah, this is the kind of thing we have here. Yeah, and it goes the other way too. You know, make me a goddess and lay at my feet all kinds of sacrifices. Yeah, yeah, live through me. And any moment that you don't hold this up, I'm going to react with anger and call you all kinds of names and problems. That's the issue of narcissism. Then you have the phallic character, flaunts his masculinity through success at work or conquest over women, constantly seeking confirmation of his potency, identifies himself with his penis. Ultimately, though, ladies and gentlemen, this is a man who's afraid of castration, who really thinks his balls have already been cut out from under him. Therefore, he needs a constant confirmation that he has them. Kind of reminds me again of the black and white video. What was that boy trying to grab down there between his legs? What are so many black men grabbing that all the time out there? Yes, seeing if it's there. Yeah, where is it? In other words, then, that relationship can move into a master-slave kind of relationship. a relationship that tries to use and exploit other people, a relationship that in a sense duplicates the social relationship that the man has. Don't worry about it, it'll be all right. At the end, you have people then who have a problem with lovability and are in constant need of reassurance. So what does this all imply? We don't have time to go into it all. What does it all imply? What does it roll out to be? It means then that if we are to transform the relationship between black males and black females and transform the nature of black life, period, we must transform the American system itself. Yeah, you can't get around that. Oh yeah, we have to if we are going to say that living in America, being black in America, creates a good deal of the problems that we have, then we must change America as a part of changing what? The problems. Now, it doesn't mean that we focus outside of ourselves, because one of the best ways of changing America is by what means? Changing ourselves. I've told you before that we are not only the creation of whites, we also create them. That they cannot be what they are unless we are what we are. And therefore, if we engage in self-transformation, we engage in the transformation of the nation and ultimately in the transformation of the world. This is what I'm saying again about an African-centered education, that more deeply than all, in terms of an African-centric education, is that we are not creating a revolution in America as much as we are creating a revolution in ourselves. But that revolution in ourselves is a revolution in America. And that's why we look at ourselves and transform ourselves. It means then that we must gain a perception of what is real. Maladaptive behaviors flow from the inability to operate in terms of what is real in the world. Where are we as African people? What is our real history? What is the real nature of this social system? And how does that reality intrude into our lives? We must come to know ourselves. If we do not know ourselves, we lose control of ourselves. We don't know why and for what reason we behave as we do. We must exercise control over ourselves. We must come to esteem ourselves and accept ourselves. To a good extent, the problems that we talk about all the time are problems that flow from people avoiding themselves, escaping their real selves, and creating mechanisms and machinations to facilitate their escape from themselves, and using other people and abusing other people in their escape from self-acceptance, in their escape from their real African selves as a people. And therefore, if we're going to stop abusing and using other people and using them as objects and so forth, then we must come back into self-acceptance and come back into reality. We must gain the ability to form affectionate relationships. And ladies and gentlemen, the ability to love and how to love affectionate relationships. And ladies and gentlemen, the ability to love and how to love is taught. In this system, we are taught that it's something that occurs accidentally and spontaneously. That is not true. Even romantic love, with all of its shivers up and down your spine, and all of this business about you can't eat and you can't sleep and, you know, you toss and turn all night and all that kind of stuff. All of that's taught. You've been listening to the music all the time, haven't you? It's told you how you should feel when you're in love. You know, right? Isn't that what it says? Oh, I think about him all the time. I can't sleep. Oh, you in love. Not necessarily. You may be addicted. Pun unintended. You may be addicted in the sense that you are using this person this relationship to escape your reality, to get away from yourself, you see? And to the degree that they can be used for you to escape who you are and what you are, to that degree you feel good in their presence. You feel euphoric. You can't live without them, because without them you go into withdrawal. You see? And you begin to face the craziness of your condition. And you begin to face the real pain that is at the root of your escape in the first place. And you can't take cold turkey and live through it and come to know what's really behind it, you see. So you reach out again for another rush, for another person, and promiscuity increases, infidelity increases, and even when you're married, you're still showing your butt and carrying on as if you're not married, you see. And you can't rest. You need the admiration of men and the admiration of women. Still, you know, it just goes on and it's endless. They can't be good enough for you. You seek perfection. You seek excitement, because that's in excitement you forget about reality. And you have good men. I run into too many good men out here. Educated men, good salaries, loyal men, I'm telling you, who are being rejected by women, black women. Don't make this game appear that it's only black men who are rejecting black women. There are many women out there, they want this perfect person. You see, this exciting person, this black white man. You see?